The girl took over her uncle's taxi shift, unaware her first passenger was a lonely millionaire in disguise. The rain drizzled against the windshield in fine mist as the streetlights of New York blurred into long golden smears. Keva adjusted her grip on the steering wheel of the aging yellow cab, her fingers trembling just slightly. Her uncle's shift badge dangled from the rearview mirror, spinning gently as she exhaled, trying to calm the nerves twisting her stomach. It was her first time behind the wheel of a taxi, and she felt like every pothole, every honk, every blinking pedestrian signal was daring her to screw it all up. She muttered under her breath, "I can handle charcoal portraits and oil on canvas, but not cab fares and brake pedals in the rain." Yeah, makes perfect sense. Just as she reached for her thermos of lukewarm coffee, the passenger door flew open with a creak. A man slid in, moving with the ease of someone used to going unnoticed. He wore a faded cap pulled low over his forehead, a dark hoodie, and jeans that had seen better days. "You free?" he asked without looking up. Yeah," Keva said, startled. "Sure, where to?" The man shrugged, his voice calm but tired. "Just drive. I'll tell you when to turn." She blinked, glanced at him through the mirror, then hesitantly tapped the meter. "All right then, buckle up, mystery man." As she pulled away from the curb, he settled back into the seat and stared out the window. A few seconds passed in silence before his voice cut through the cab again. "You always drive like that?" he asked flatly. "Like what?" Keva replied, eyes flicking to the mirror. "Like you're racing an ambulance to the emergency room. Driving like that, are you going to take me to the hospital?" Keva scoffed. "Driving a taxi at night is dangerous. I hope you're not a murderer." Robert arched an eyebrow, half amused. "That's oddly specific." She shrugged, managing a crooked smile. "What can I say? My uncle's a cop. It rubs off." They reached a red light. The cab idled in the rain as pedestrians hurried across the crosswalk with umbrellas turned inside out. Keva tapped her fingers on the steering wheel to a rhythm only she could hear. "You got a name, speed demon?" he asked. "Keva," she said. "You?" He hesitated. "Robert." Another stretch of quiet. "So, Keva," he said slowly, "what's a girl like you doing driving a cab this late? You don't look like the usual crowd." She sighed. "Filling in for my uncle. He pulled something in his back, and I need the money, so—" Robert nodded slowly. "You in school?" "Was," she replied. "Art major. Took a break because money's tight, and apparently the universe doesn't accept sketches in lieu of rent." "Art, huh? You paint?" "Mostly," she said. "Acrylics, some mixed media. I like capturing things people don't notice." Robert turned his head slightly. "Like what?" She smiled faintly. Empty subway seats, cracked glass, people waiting. He gave a quiet, then said, "That's not what I expected. Most people say sunsets or dogs playing poker." She chuckled. "I like beauty that sneaks up on you." "Sounds lonely," he said. The comment caught her off guard. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but sometimes lonely is honest." Robert didn't respond right away. He turned his gaze back to the rain-covered window. Honest, that's a rare word these days. Keva risked another look at him. There was something about his voice, slow, thoughtful, not careless, not casual, and under the layers of damp clothing and the guarded tone was a sadness she couldn't quite place. "You talk like a guy who's had too many conversations with expensive therapists," she said carefully. He smirked. "You're not far off. And what do you do, Robert, other than giving rookie cab drivers a heart attack?" He shifted in his seat. "I used to run something big. These days, I try to disappear." Keva raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Instead, she asked, "What's your favorite music?" "Old jazz," he said, "the kind that makes you miss people you never met." She nodded slowly. "Coltrane or Miles Davis?" "Miles," he said. "Always Miles." They drove through lower Manhattan, the city quieter than usual in the mist. Streetlights reflected on the wet pavement like stars that had fallen too low. "You ever feel like this city is too big for one heart?" Keva asked. "All the time," Robert replied. They fell into silence again, but it was different now, less like strangers, more like people who had met before in another life. Something was shifting in the air, even if neither of them could name it. Keva took a left turn without asking. "Where are we going?" Robert asked. "To the place where I always go when I feel like vanishing," she said. "You seem like you need it more than I do tonight." Robert didn't argue. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside the cab, two unlikely souls rode through the night, searching for something neither of them knew they had already begun to find. The clock on the dashboard ticked past 1. Oh, clock Aim. But neither Keva nor Robert seemed in a hurry to end the ride. The cab cruised quietly through the near-empty streets, the rain now reduced to a gentle patter. The city, in its rare calm, had started to reveal a different face, less chaotic, more vulnerable, just like the man in the back seat. "Turn left here," Robert said suddenly. Keva glanced in the mirror. "You got a destination in mind now?" "Brooklyn Bridge, you mind?" She grinned. "Only if you plan to jump off it," he chuckled. "No promises." They crossed the bridge slowly, the wheels humming over the damp steel. The skyline of Manhattan stretched behind them in a golden arc, and for a moment they both looked out in silence. "My uncle used to bring me here when I was little," Robert said softly. "Told me the city looked better from a distance." Keva didn't say anything. She let the words sit, heavy but tender. After a long pause, he added, "Can we stop by a coffee place? One on 9th and Carmine, if it's still there?" "You mean Carmine's Cafe? That place is ancient." "That's the one." 10 minutes later, they were parked outside a faded storefront with chipped red paint and a flickering neon sign that read, "Open all night." Robert disappeared inside, returned with 2 cups of coffee, and handed one to Keva through the open window. "You didn't have to," she began. "I wanted to," he said simply. She sipped it. "Wow, this tastes like 1995 in a cup," he laughed, leaning against the side of the cab. "It's where my uncle taught me to play piano. They used to have one in the back room, every Friday night." Keva tilted her head. "You mentioned your uncle before. He sounds important to you." Robert looked off into the distance. "Keva was more than important. He was the only one who saw me when everyone else just saw my last name." "You must have loved him a lot." "I still do," he said quietly. "He passed away 6 years ago." Keva watched him closely. "And you come back here to remember?" He nodded. "I guess I'm chasing ghosts." She didn't press further. Instead, she turned the key in the ignition and said, "Where to next?" "Queens, 82nd Street." The drive was longer this time. As they rolled through familiar boroughs and unfamiliar memories, Keva started to feel like this wasn't just a taxi ride. It was a map of someone's soul being unfolded in slow, careful gestures. They pulled up to a quiet, tree-lined street lined with old brick houses. Robert stared at one in particular. Its windows were dark, the porch light dim. "I grew up there," he said, "before everything changed." "You don't live there anymore?" He shook his head. "Hasn't been mine for a long time." Keva looked at him in the mirror, something pulling at her heart. "Robert, what exactly are you running from?" He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "What about you? Why art?" She smiled faintly. "Because it's the only thing that made sense. When everything else felt loud and heavy, painting made the world quiet. Like breathing in color." He studied her. "And what are you chasing?" "Freedom," she said. "A life that doesn't feel borrowed." Robert nodded slowly. "I think we're more alike than you think." She turned to face him fully. "Maybe, but you still feel like someone out of place." He offered a tired smile. "That's because I am." As the cab idled in front of his childhood home, the silence between them deepened, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared, like a secret held between the two of them, suspended in the early morning fog. "Anywhere else?" she asked. He looked at her and said quietly, "Would you drive me a little longer? I'll pay double." Keva blinked. "Seriously?" Robert nodded. "I don't want to be alone tonight." She hesitated, then gave a small smile. "Deal." As she pulled away from the curb, neither of them knew what lay ahead, but they both knew something had shifted. The cab rolled slowly through the quiet streets of Queens, and Keva turned the heat up a notch. The windows fogged slightly, the air inside thick with the scent of old vinyl and fresh coffee. Robert sat in the back, his gaze fixed out the window, watching familiar buildings blur past like memories he wasn't ready to face head-on. "You sure you want to keep going?" she asked softly, glancing at him in the mirror. He didn't respond right away. Then, almost absently, he said, "I'll pay double if you drive me for the rest of the night." Keva's eyebrows lifted. "You serious?" "I don't joke about money," he said, and for the first time there was something heavy in his voice, not arrogance, just exhaustion. Keva hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But it's not about the money." Robert looked at her, and for a second he seemed to be weighing her, trying to decide if he could trust her with whatever he was carrying. "I haven't told anyone this in years," he said finally, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the engine. "But I figure, if I'm going to say it, it might as well be to someone who has no reason to lie to me." Keva turned down the radio, giving him her full attention. "I was 15 when my mom got sick," he began. "Ovarian cancer, the kind they don't catch until it's too late. She was a music teacher, gentle, warm, everything soft you can imagine in a person. My father, he was the opposite. Sharp, cold, always building things, buying things, closing deals. When she died, he buried himself deeper into the business." "Didn't even cry at her funeral," Keva swallowed. "I'm sorry." Robert nodded slightly, eyes still distant. "He had me enrolled in boarding school 2 weeks later. Said I needed structure. What I needed was my mother." Silence fell between them. He went on. "By the time I turned 25, I was CEO of his company. He handed it over with a speech about legacy and strength, and how emotions were for the weak. I made millions before I even knew what it meant to be happy, and none of it ever felt like mine." Keva listened, her hands tightening around the steering wheel. Robert exhaled slowly, then leaned his head against the window. "I started sneaking out at night, disguised myself, took walks, talked to strangers. That's how I learned what life actually looked like. People arguing at diners, musicians playing for tips, kids laughing in alleyways. It felt real." He paused, then added, "But the more I saw it, the less I felt I belonged." Keva let the words sink in before she responded. "Do you believe that wealth is sometimes a prison?" Robert turned to look at her, surprised she beat him to the thought. "You took that right out of my head," she gave a half smile. "Surely the prison has marble floors." Robert laughed softly, but it was a sad laugh, the kind that aches in your chest, "and locked the door from the inside," he finished. Keva glanced at him again. "So, is that what tonight is? A jailbreak?" He didn't answer right away. "Maybe, or maybe it's the first night I stopped pretending I liked being trapped." They fell into silence again, but this time it was deeper, more intimate, the kind of quiet you only share with someone who has heard your worst and hasn't walked away. Keva turned down a narrow street lined with closed storefronts and dark windows. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Robert." "I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It is," she said. "You talk like someone who's been cracked open, but still keeps walking." Robert leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What about you? You ever feel like life handed you the wrong script?" Keva laughed softly. "Every day. I was supposed to be halfway through an artist residency in Florence right now. Instead, I'm driving my uncle's cab and wondering if I'll ever hold a paintbrush for something other than commission work again." "Why didn't you go?" "Couldn't afford it. Could barely afford groceries last month. Dreams don't pay rent." Robert stared at her, something tightening in his chest. "You're more of a fighter than I've ever been." She shrugged. "I fake it pretty well." He smiled faintly. "You don't need to fake anything. Not with me." Keva turned another corner, the cab sliding smoothly into a long avenue washed in amber streetlight. Outside, the city kept sleeping, but inside that cab, two people who had never planned to meet were beginning to see one another in ways that went beyond words. "Thank you," Robert said quietly. "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm broken." Keva met his eyes in the mirror. "You're not broken, Robert. You're just searching." He didn't reply, but for the first time in years, He felt like someone had said the one thing he didn't know he needed to hear, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep going. The sky had turned a deep, moody gray by the time Keva turned onto 47th Street. Rain drummed against the roof of the cab, steady and unrelenting, turning the windows into smeared mirrors of city lights. It was well past 2 in the morning, but the world still buzzed with late-night energy, neon signs, closing diners, tired people making their way home. Inside the cab, it had grown quiet. Not the comfortable kind of silence that had settled between them earlier, but something heavier. Something pressing on Keva's chest like the moment before thunder. Robert sat in the back, eyes distant. The warmth that had colored his voice earlier had faded. He'd been fidgeting with his phone, distracted, more guarded. Keva glanced at him through the mirror. "You all right back there?" He didn't respond at first. Then his phone lit up. She caught a quick glimpse of the screen as he lifted it. Incoming call. CEO office. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her heart lurched. The call buzzed again. This time, Robert sighed and silenced it. But Keva had already seen it, already felt it like a slap. "CO office?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed her. "That your boss or something?" Robert froze for a second too long. Then he muttered, "Not exactly." "Then what exactly, Robert?" Her tone shifted, sharpened. "Because unless CEO is your yoga instructor's nickname, I think you've got some explaining to do." He leaned forward slightly, voice low. "Keva, it's not what you think." She pulled the car into the side lane, tires splashing through puddles. "Then tell me what it is. Because I've been driving around thinking I was talking to a man who gets it, who understands what it's like to fight for something real, and now I find out you're, what, some kind of billionaire playing dress-up? It's not dress-up," he snapped, suddenly defensive. "I wasn't trying to fool you. You didn't tell me the truth either." He leaned closer. "I just wanted a night. One night where I could be someone else. Someone who didn't have everything decided for him. Someone who didn't have to be looked at like a brand." "Ah," she said bitterly, "so the poor little rich guy decided to take a night off and play pretend with the cab girl." His face darkened. "Don't do that." "Do what? Be angry that you lied? That you made me feel like we were talking as equals when you were hiding behind a mask the entire time?" "I never lied to you," he insisted. "I didn't use a fake name. I didn't manipulate anything. You let me believe you were someone else." He looked down, then back at her. "You looked at me like I was a person, not a paycheck, not a profile in Forbes, just a man. That's all I wanted." "Well, congratulations," she said, voice cracking. "You got what you wanted, and I got played." They stared at each other in the storm-lit cabin of the car, the air between them brittle and charged. Then Keva spoke again, softer this time, but sharper. "You want to be normal? Try walking away from a scholarship because your mother can't afford your books. Try selling your sketches on sidewalks just to buy paint. Try waking up every day wondering if your dreams are just too expensive to keep alive." "I didn't mean to hurt you," Robert said quietly. I didn't know how to be honest without losing you." "You never had me," Keva replied. "Because you never gave me the chance to see the real you." She pulled the handle and pushed the passenger door open from the front. "Get out, Robert." "Keva, now." The rain rushed in like a slap of cold air. Robert hesitated, then stepped out slowly, water instantly soaking through his clothes. He looked back at her one last time, his face unreadable in the dark. "I wasn't trying to escape you," he said. "I was trying to escape everything else." Then he shut the door. Keva watched him disappear into the rain, his silhouette swallowed by puddles and streetlights and everything unsaid. She sat there for a long time, unmoving, the wipers sweeping across the windshield like tired arms. The meter kept running, but the ride was over. The next morning the sun rose reluctantly, pushing through clouds that hadn't yet forgiven the night. Keva sat on the small stoop outside her apartment, a lukewarm mug of instant coffee between her hands and a sketchbook on her lap, unopened. She hadn't slept. Robert's face haunted her, not because he was rich, or even because he had hidden it, but because, for a fleeting moment, he had felt real. She'd seen pain in him, vulnerability, and for the first time in a long while, She had let someone in. Now the memory of that night tasted like betrayal. She pushed herself up and walked to the bookstore where she worked part-time. The world moved on. Customers came and went, and Keva smiled on cue, but everything felt muted, like someone had turned the volume of her life down. At night she painted, but the canvases stayed blank longer than usual. Her brush trembled. Her colors felt dull. She missed the unexpected laughter in the cab, the sound of his voice when he talked about music, the way he listened when she spoke about her dreams. Across the city, Robert sat at a table he didn't want to be at, in a restaurant he didn't choose, across from a woman he'd just been introduced to. "She comes from the Duval family," his father had said earlier. "Very successful, very polished. You two would make a fine pair." The woman smiled politely, listed off her business ventures and country clubs, then asked, "So what do you do when you're not running an empire?" Robert smiled thinly. "Apparently I ride in cabs." She laughed, not understanding the weight behind the words. His father beamed from across the room. Robert felt like he was watching his life play out in a movie he didn't audition for. That night, alone in his penthouse, he scrolled through his call history. Keva's number sat at the top, unanswered. He typed a message, deleted it, tried again, still couldn't send it. He walked to the window, looked out at the city lights that used to feel like victory and now just felt distant. In the quiet, he whispered, "I'm sorry." But no one was there to hear it. In her apartment, Keva stared at a new blank canvas, and this time she didn't try to fill it. She just let it be. The gallery was quiet except for the soft shuffling of footsteps on polished concrete floors and the occasional murmur of art enthusiasts. Abstracts, portraits, and moody cityscapes lined the walls, each canvas capturing a moment, a feeling, a truth. Robert had not planned to be there. He had passed by on his way to a business lunch, saw the modest sign for the local artist showcase, and, on a whim he could not explain, stepped inside. He wandered through the space, hands in his coat pockets, until one painting stopped him cold. It was a street scene at night. Rain fell in streaks of blue and gray. A yellow cab sat at the curb, its headlights glowing softly in the mist. Inside the cab, a man sat in the back seat, barely visible, his face shadowed, his posture weary, head turned toward the rain-blurred window. The driver, a young woman, was caught in the moment of a glance into the mirror, her eyes meeting his. The plaque read, "Stranger in the Rain, Mixed Media by Keva Morgan." His breath caught. He moved closer. Every brushstroke felt like a memory. The fog on the windows, the tension in the cab, the silence charged with something unspoken. It was that night. Their night. Frozen in paint and emotion. She remembered. She had painted him. Robert stood there for a long time before he turned, walked out into the sunlight, and pulled out his phone. Keva was stacking a pile of poetry books when the bell above the bookstore door jingled. She looked up and felt her chest tighten. Robert stood there, holding the door, his eyes searching for hers across the rows of bookshelves. He looked the same, simple jacket, dark jeans. But there was something softer in his posture, something less guarded. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he took a step forward. "I saw the painting," he said. Keva blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said. She crossed her arms. "So now the CEO has time for bookstore visits?" He winced slightly, but didn't look away. "I deserved that." "Yeah," she said, her voice sharper than she meant. "You did." "I didn't come here to explain away what I did," he said, "or who I am. I came because I saw that painting and it felt like you'd taken a piece of my soul and put it on a canvas." Keva looked down. Her fingers traced the spine of a book on the counter. "You were never just a fare to me." "I know." She looked at him. "Then why lie?" He stepped closer. "Because I was scared. I spent so long living behind titles and expectations, I didn't know who I was without them. And when you saw me not as a name or a fortune or a position, but just me, it terrified me. Because it was real." She didn't speak. Her throat tightened. "I was scared of losing something that actually mattered," he continued. "But by hiding, I lost it anyway. He exhaled, voice lower now. "Keva, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel like I was playing with your life. I wasn't. Meeting you, it was the first honest thing that had happened to me in years." She studied him for a long moment. "I don't care about your money," she said finally. "I never did. But I needed you to be real with me, all the way." "I will be," he said. "From now on." She gave a small nod, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "I don't know if I can just jump back in," she said. "There's still this space between our worlds. I live in a rented apartment and take shifts just to afford paints. You live in a world of tailored suits and strategic mergers. How do we even meet in the middle?" Robert looked at her, really looked at her, then said gently, "I don't need a world of suits. I just need someone who sees me." And I think that's more than enough middle ground. Keva didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either. Their silence stretched, thick with emotion and possibility. Then a voice called from the back of the store, her manager asking for help with inventory. "I should get back," she said softly. He nodded, stepping back. "I'll wait." She looked at him again, surprised. "As long as it takes," he said, and for the first time since that night in the rain, Keva allowed herself to believe he meant it. The study was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. The air was thick with expectation and quiet fury as Robert stood across from his father, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. The older man sat behind his massive desk, posture perfect, every word that came from his mouth laced with calculation. "She is not right for you, Robert," his father said, calmly but firmly. "This is not emotion. It is logic. You know what is at stake." Robert didn't flinch. "What's at stake is your control." His father narrowed his eyes. "No. What's at stake is the legacy I built for this family, and you're jeopardizing it over a fleeting distraction." "She is not a distraction," Robert said, the first trace of heat slipping into his voice. "She's the only person who's seen me for who I am." "You think love pays dividends?" His father snapped. "You think it protects assets, maintains board confidence, sustains a billion-dollar empire? I don't care about the empire." "Then you're a fool." Robert leaned forward, his jaw tight. "If you're saying I have to choose between the money and her—" "I'm not saying it," his father interrupted. "I'm demanding it." The silence that followed was sharp. Then his father added coldly, "You will end this relationship. You will proceed with the Kensington arrangement. And the board will be reassured of your commitment to this company." Robert stared at him. "And if I don't?" His father didn't blink. "You'll be cut off, removed from all holdings. Your name will remain, but the wealth will not follow." Robert stood there for a long moment, the weight of a lifetime of pressure, expectations, perfection, rehearsed roles pressed down on his shoulders like chains. But then, in his mind, he saw Keva. Saw her laughing behind the wheel of a taxi, saw her standing in the bookstore, paint on her hands, saw the look in her eyes when she had whispered, "I just need the truth," and he knew. He placed the whiskey glass down on the desk, untouched. "If losing all of this," he said quietly, "is the price I have to pay to keep the one thing that's ever felt real." He looked his father straight in the eye. "Then it's the best deal I've ever made." His father's mouth tightened, but Robert didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out. That night, Robert packed a single suitcase. He left the penthouse he had never really called home and moved into a small loft in Brooklyn he had bought years ago but never used. The space was modest, one bedroom, old wooden floors and paint-chipped windows. But it was his, entirely his. He spent that first night on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by boxes, with no staff to cook or clean, no assistants to plan his week, and for the first time in years, he breathed freely. The next morning he made his own coffee, burned his toast and smiled. Later, he sat at his desk and pulled out a notepad, not a laptop, not a voice assistant. He began sketching something new, a life, a gallery space he wanted to fund, an art scholarship, a letter he would write to Keva. He wasn't sure what would happen when he gave it to her, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, it would be his choice, and he would choose her. every time. The walls of the old community center were lined with color, finger-painted suns, messy self-portraits, wild acrylic jungles crafted by small, eager hands. Keva stood in the middle of it all, her smock covered in smudges of blue and yellow, smiling as a group of children gathered around their canvases. It had been a year since that stormy night. A year since a stranger climbed into her cab and changed everything. And now Keva was no longer just surviving. She was painting, teaching, laughing, living. She had turned her dream into something real, an after-school program for kids who had nowhere else to go. Some of them had never touched a brush before. Now, they left the center with paint on their cheeks and light in their eyes. And Robert? He had kept his promise to her and to himself. He stepped away from the world of power suits and gold-plated elevators. He created a foundation that funded arts education in underserved communities. He showed up at gallery openings in rolled sleeves and sneakers. His name was still whispered in boardrooms, but he no longer cared to be in them. And every Saturday, without fail, he came to Keva's class. Not as a sponsor, not as a savior, but as Robert. Just Robert. That evening, Keva walked out of the center and found a familiar sight waiting for her at the curb. A yellow cab, the same model her uncle used to drive, old, dented, but freshly cleaned. Its windows sparkled in the golden haze of sunset. Its metered display flickered, set to $0.00. Robert stood beside it, leaning casually against the door, holding 2 takeout cups of coffee. He looked up and smiled the way he always did when she appeared, like the world made sense again. "Need a ride?" he asked. Keva raised an eyebrow, laughing. "You bought a taxi?" "I borrowed one," he said. "Restored it. Your uncle said I could surprise you with it." He opened the passenger door for her. She stepped in, shaking her head. "This feels familiar," she murmured. Robert climbed into the driver's seat. "Yeah, but this time I get to drive." They cruised through the quiet streets, windows down, music low. The city had softened with the evening, golden light painting the rooftops. They passed the bridge, the bookstore, the corner where they'd argued in the rain. When they reached the park where they'd first stopped that night, Robert pulled over and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Robert turned to her, his voice calm but full. "That first ride. I didn't know what I was looking for." Keva watched him quietly. "I thought I was running from something," he continued, "but then you looked at me through that rearview mirror and for the first time I felt seen. Not as a Carson, not as a number, just me." She reached for his hand. "You were always more than any name." He pulled something from the glove compartment, a small velvet box, opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, handcrafted. The band was shaped from polished silver, but embedded within it, barely visible unless you looked closely, was a tiny emblem made from part of an old taximeter, a nod to where they'd begun. "I don't need a mansion," he said softly. "I don't need boardrooms or titles or fortune." He took her hand. "I need this. I need you. Keva Morgan, will you ride with me? Through everything?" Her eyes filled, but her smile was steady. "Only," she whispered, "if we're in the same car." Robert laughed, his heart full. She added, "Because as long as we're together, even a taxi becomes home." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Then, under the glow of the old taxi sign he had placed atop the cab, they kissed. Not as strangers, not as people from different worlds, but as 2 souls who had found the same road, and this time, neither of them would ride alone again. And so, under the soft glow of a yellow taxi sign and a sky painted with twilight, 2 hearts that once wandered in opposite directions finally found their way, together. In a world often divided by status, wealth, and circumstance, Keva and Robert reminded us that love does not ask for titles, only truth. That sometimes, the most unexpected ride can take us exactly where we are meant to be. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of the beauty and simple, honest connection, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We bring you real emotions, unforgettable journeys, and tales that heal the soul, one story at a time, because sometimes all it takes is one ride to change everything. Subscribe now and let your heart ride with us.